Good morning, everyone. Happy to see so many of you here today. Happy Father's Day to all those of us who are fathers. For those of you who were here last week to Visak Day, we had many people here for that event. It was sponsored by the Buddhist Council of St. Louis, and several groups from around St. Louis came and joined us, and we were suffering at that time from a drought, and right in the middle, we were all indoors, of course, but right in the middle, we had a nice torrential downpour, and it didn't rain while people came in, nor did it rain when people went out in the middle. Today, I'm going to be doing the fourth in a series of talks on the sutra on mindfulness of inhalation and exhalation, the Jīng, which is, today I'm going to talk about the influence of this particular sutra on the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra. That's where I'm headed. But in the meantime, I'm assuming that many of you did not come to my other 3 talks, or if you did, it was a while ago and you may need a refresher. So for those of you who remember all of this before, and this is just a repeat, it's okay. I'll go as well as I can through this so that we can understand the review of the other parts. So, as I like to say, this particular sutra is the missing link between the original teachings of the Buddha on mindfulness of breathing, called Anapanasati Sutta, and the foundation of Zen practice in Japan, and many things in between. So the reason that this is called a new meditation on the breath will become clear in a moment. There are 2 main versions of this particular text, neither of which have been translated into English. The first one is a text called the Jīng. Da means great. This T stands for the Taisho version that you find in the electronic, well, now it's electronic, but the original translation of the text into Chinese by many Japanese scholars. This particular version has many commentaries that are infused into the text. So we really didn't know what was the original text and what was the commentary. And then in 1999, there was a discovery of the original text without any of the commentaries. And this is now known as the Jīng. So it's K meaning related to the place in Japan where this was found, in the Japanese temple. The Kongo-ji manuscript. Okay. So we have the larger text that has many commentaries, and then we have the basic one. So we can say both of these together, we'll just call them the Jīng. And we have a timeline here where the Buddha gave his original Anapanasati Sutta teaching on mindfulness of the breath in the 5th century BCE. And then we have this Jīng that shows up in 148 CE, translated from a Sanskrit text which has been lost by a translator by the name of Anshigao. And this becomes the first text on meditation translated into Chinese from the Sanskrit. And then this text, we can find versions of this, or references to it, in a text that was translated by Kuma Jiva in the 4th century, actually in 401, 5th century. And then Vasubandhu in the 4th century, who was a great Yogacara teacher. It's found in one of his texts. And then it's found in Buddhaghosa's Visuddhimagga, the basic text for Theravadan Buddhism, also referenced in Master Jīng of the Tiantai school in the 6th century. And then again in the 13th century, in Japan, it shows up again in the teachings basically by Kaizan, who was a disciple of Dogen, who introduced breathing or counting meditation into Soto Zen, that thought. And then, of course, we had the rediscovery in 1999, and then some partial translations in 2008 into English. So this is a little bit of a timeline that we can see how strong the influence is of mindfulness of the breath and this introduction of this method of counting, which is very popular in Zen. So a little bit about Anshigao. Anshigao was, we're not exactly sure too much about his life, but he did some wonderful translations along the way. And his contributions are certainly well considered. Now, this is an outline of the original text, the Anapanasati Sutta, which is a MN Majjhima Nikaya 118. It's also found in the Samutta Nikaya 54.1. And it's also found in several of the Agama, the Chinese versions of these texts. One of them being, as we see here, 803 in the Chinese Agama. So what do we know? We know that the first tetrad of the 4 tetrads, mindfulness of the breath in 16 parts. The first part is accessible to just about everybody. And there is this teaching about breathing in long and breathing in short, and sensitive to the entire body and calming the bodily formations, which is actually the breath. When the Buddha gave instructions, not just in Anapanasati, but in Satipatthana and numbers of other suttas that were teaching mindfulness meditation, he always began his teachings by saying to the participants, sending the awareness to the breath, and then he would say ardent, alert, and mindful, but in other texts sometimes he would say something a little bit different. But most of the time, he would say ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside our wants and worries about the daily life. Always mindful, I breathe in, always mindful, I breathe out. And then he would say, breathing in long, I breathe in long, breathing in short, I breathe in short, breathing out. For example, that's how he would begin this. This is his main method of teaching. And this is accessible pretty much to everybody. And then when you get to the second tetrad, you see very soon that you're talking about people who have practiced well enough that they're able to enter into what are called the jhanas. By step number 5, the person has entered into this second jhana, where they're using the third jhana factor. So in other words, they have been able to have all of their discursive chatter, all of their thinking, their storytelling, all of that noise in the mind that we live with all of the time. They've learned how basically to calm that down so that it's hardly discernible, not there. So when that happens, there is this arising of an inner joy. And as you go deeper into these concentration states, the jhanas, then a sense of blissful pleasure of not of the physical kind, but of the spiritual type emerges, as happiness emerges. And then the person is able to become sensitive to their mental formations, namely the patterns that are in the mind of how thinking takes place. And so then the person in the third tetrad, then they can go deeper. They can become sensitive to the mind, satisfying the mind, steadying the mind, and then releasing the mind. So this is even a deeper practice that requires, I believe, probably going into the fourth jhana. And then in the last section, the person is able to focus on impermanence, dispassion, cessation, and relinquishment. So the person now has fully evolved, matured in their practice. And this is anapanasati. So when most people are talking about, I'm practicing mindfulness of the breath, they're just practicing the first tetrad. And then those folks who have been able to do longer retreats, and they've been able to calm their mind, do a retreat for 3 years, then you might be able to calm your mind. Maybe 3 months, you can calm your mind pretty well. Then you can experience some of these jhana states. But this is not something that people outside of talking with their teacher, they all discuss this. They don't say, oh, today I reached the third jhana. It's not something that we talk about in that way, because this would be an ego striving, and we don't want to do that. So this is the formula that was always used by the Buddha. Breathing in long, he discerns, I breathe in long. Breathing in short, I discern, I breathe in short. And with the breathing out. So the difficulty was that many people who were lay folks, they wanted to practice mindfulness too, and they wanted to be able to go deeper into the practice and perhaps be able to reach some of the stages, maybe not all the way into the jhanas, but to get closer to that. And they wanted techniques to be able to do that. We see that in the Visuddhimagga, for example, the step-by-step practices to help people get to the doorway or the gateway to the higher levels of concentration. And so it must have been at the time when Anshe Gao was translating this for people in China. Most of the people who were interested were lay folks, as well as monastics. They wanted to have a method, a step-by-step method. And so there were these teachings that were beyond what we would find in the original teachings, that would give some methodology to help people go deeper into the practice. And that's what the Anban Jīng is about. It's the step-by-step method to help you go deeper into the practice. Even though you might not be able to get to the jhana, you can still calm your mind. And this became even more important with the Bodhisattva path, where going into the jhana was not nearly as essential. Being able to be a benefit to others also requires being able to calm your mind down a lot. So in the steps, in the Jīng, they talk about practicing with the breath, and then practicing with the breath in order to be able to understand and calm down the 5 aggregates. Talk a little bit about that in a moment. And then how this teaching relates to the 37 prerequisites, the attainment of enlightenment, and then practicing with antidotes, things that would help us to counter the afflictions and obstructions in the mind that we run into. How we might get angry, we need to be able to have an antidote for that. How we might want something very, very much, we need an antidote for that. Falling asleep, becoming restless. We need antidotes to these things. And then today I'm going to talk a little bit about the influence on another text called the Tao Te Ching. There's a little hitch in there. You might say, oh, maybe I'm misspelling something, but maybe not. Before we get there, let me review a little bit about what these 6 steps were that are in the Jīng. So basically the same in the Jīng and in the K version, where a person will begin by doing counting. So as they inhale, they say the number 1, they exhale, they say the number 2, inhale, say the number 3, exhale, say the number 4, all the way up to 10, and then start again. If the mind is chattering a lot and you get to number 3 and you lose it, it's okay, you just go back to number 1. If the mind is also chattering a lot and you find yourself on number 43, you just come back to number 1. So there's no blame, there's no gold star. You just do this practice over and over again, calming the mind. There are some variations on this. One variation is to say the number 1 as you inhale and exhale. Say the number 2 as you inhale and exhale. It takes a little bit longer to get to 10. But basically, it's the same technique. And after doing that and seeing how that goes, I like to do a number of rounds of that. Then a person will then focus on the sensation of the breath itself. So now we're just feeling the sensation of the breathing in the body, in the abdomen or at the point where the breath enters the nose. You just notice that. And sometimes the mind, to stay on track, will say things like rising and ceasing, rising and ceasing. Or another technique is a rising, abiding, changing, and ceasing. So there's a pause at the top and at the bottom. That's another talk. But then the next step, a little bit more serious, is stopping. So this is where we become aware. Up till now, we allow the mind to just notice that it's chattering away, the storytelling, etc. And then we realize, oh, it's a good idea to see if I can stop this. And so every time the mind starts wandering, it's almost a little bit like catch and release. We catch the thought and then we release it. And then if the person is more proficient and is able to do some of this, then there's a higher level of observing where we observe how these 5 aggregates of our body, the form, our feelings, our thoughts, our habitual patterns, and our consciousness, that's another topic, how all of these things fit together and cause us to have what would be called sentience, or this life. And without these factors, we don't have this life. So we attend to these aggregates and we become more sensitive as to how they work. And in the next level, we go even deeper into that. And then finally, we uproot all of the hindrances of the desires and the anger and the tiredness, the restlessness and the doubt. We've been able to uproot all of those. And then we're ready to enter into the gate of the jhanas, perhaps. As I said, in addition to that there's also a connection to the 37 practices, these 37 prerequisites the Buddha lays out. Remember, Buddhism was very much an oral tradition. And so in order to, for 400 years, people passed on the teachings of the Buddha, so they had to have lists. So they knew that there are 37 prerequisites. I only have 36 in my mind. I must have missed one. I better go over to one of the other helpers. Or which one am I missing? And so the 4 foundations of mindfulness all the way up to the Eightfold Path are part of this 37 prerequisites. This is a whole other teaching. But it's connected. It's found in the Jīng. And it's connected to each one of the 6 stages. There are 7 sets. So one of the sets observing takes on 2 parts. So they also talk about these antidotes, these things that will help us overcome the obstacles. That's important. And that finds its way into a number of other teachings. One being the 5 views that arrest thought. It's very difficult to stop by thinking. So one of those teachings is called the Sutra on Mindfulness of Inhalation and Exhalation. This is the Jīng that talks about this. And also another text that was translated in 401 by Kumarajiva called the Sutra on Concentration of Sitting Meditation. So try Sangye. And then it's found in the 6 gates of, as a means of counteracting these counteractions or antidotes that are found in Master Ji's 6 sublime Dharma gates. The Xiǎnkuān. Yeah, it's a little bit tricky to translate, and you'll find it translated in different ways, like marvelous or mysterious. I like the translation of sublime. I think that catches it pretty well. And then the 5 approaches to meditation that you were going to find in the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, a commentary on the Yogacara Bhumi Sutra. Okay. So these techniques find their way in, just as they were written in the Jīng. They're highlighted in text, and we can see in the charts how in the Jīng on the left we have the different levels that are related there and how it's connected to, in this case, the text by Kumarajiva, and how they're basically the same. When you're having trouble with lusting or wanting something a lot, we focus on how what we want is not going to bring us all that much happiness. It's not totally pure. Impurity is a little strange word for us in our modern age, but we can imagine. I like to talk about wanting to get a Tesla. But if you get a Tesla, it's not totally pure. Eventually, the battery will wear out. You've got to figure out what to do with that. Or you'll be driving along and you're going to want to plug in and go to the place and it might not be working. Now you're stuck. Many cars now don't have spare tires. This is distressing. Not pure. So even though you might get the best car, it's not perfect. And then you'll take it to a parking lot somewhere and someone will open their door and make a dent. Suffering, dukkha. In the same way, we have anger. This can be a big problem. So we need to practice loving kindness and compassion as the antidote. We have delusions about things. We get confused. We need to understand more about causes and conditions, how things come about. When we get attached to ourselves with our pride, we need to practice things that have to do with worldly discrimination. These are not related to this is me, this is mine, this is who I am. And then doubt and confusion, jump in, practice mindfulness of the breath. And then another condition where many different problems pop up. So one point is meditation, calling the Buddha to mind. So these techniques are all found within these different texts, and they're basically the same. The 6 gates, the means of counteraction found in the 6 sublime Dharma gate, they're identical. Basically, the same kinds of methodologies are found there. And when you get to the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, this very important text, when a person has a propensity to craving, what are they supposed to do? Meditate on impurity. Anger, meditate on loving kindness. Illusion and confusion, causes and conditions. Pride, worldly discrimination. Discursive thinking, mindfulness of the breath. Identical. All of these things are all connected back to our friend Xiǎnkuān Don, and also connected back to the original teachings of the Buddha. Now, part 4, minutes, for a minute. 4th part. This has to do with the Yogacara Sutra. Yogacara Bhumi, has to do with the study of how the mind works at the ground level. And it talks about stages of the path. And this is translated into Chinese as the Jīng. Now, the word Di here is not the word Dao De Jing. Dao De Jing is the text written by Lao Tzu, the way and its virtue, famous Taoist, the fundamental Taoist text. But here, this is a different text. This has to do with the way and stages text. And this particular text was translated by 2 different people, different periods of time. One was by Dharma Raksha in 284 CE. And then it was also translated by our friend Anshigao in 148 to 170. So it was actually translated after he translated the Da'an Ban Shui Jing that we've been talking about. And again, we don't want to confuse the stages with the virtue. E is a ground stage. So you can see the character is different. De is virtue. It means having an upright heart. Upright here is 10 eyes. 10 eyes see things all the same way. Upright. So these two versions, the first one we call the XX, DDJ, and the second one, the DDJ, they're nearly identical in their format. Particularly the chapters 1 through 5 and 22 and 24, but chapter 23 is missing in the Anshigao version. What is chapter 23? Chapter 23 is a commentary on the Anapanasati Sutta, mindfulness of breath. So why is it that he did not translate that? Well, here's a verification that the two versions are the same. We won't go into this so much because of our time. And the master who has been translating this text, I'm very grateful to him, Gokwe, guessing is how he pronounces it. He is a teacher in Dharma Drum, one of the major schools in Taiwanese Buddhism. And he talks about what is in chapter 23. One of the things that's in it is called, what he translated as 16 special winds. And then a whole bunch of other things. And he says, this is what's in this text. The most unique part of these 16 superior methods of meditation, which he calls the special winds. And it includes a vertical and a horizontal set of practices. Now, the difficulty is that this particular teaching, of course, never translated into Chinese, from the Chinese into English. One of the things that I like to do with my spare time is not play Dungeons and Dragons. I play how to translate Chinese texts. So I've over time figured out how to get into the Taisho and into the Sibeta and be able to find these verses, and then using some of the technology that's out there. AI has been very helpful. There are some good translation things. They do about an 80% good job of translating it, and then I can see where the mistakes are, and I can correct the mistakes and come up with a decent translation that then I usually forward on to one of the venerables to help me make sure I don't mess up. In this case, I didn't do that yet. So the master at Dharma Drum, he says, Anshigai did not have a problem understanding the chapter 23. Sorry, this is a mistake. He had a problem understanding chapter 23. It's what the master talks about. But I don't believe that he had a problem understanding it. I think he had already translated it the year before, and he didn't want to translate it again because it has the same material in it. But the one thing that he didn't go into was these 16 methods. So here are the 16 methods in the vertical, starting at the bottom, going up to the top, and you can see how it follows exactly the Anapanasati Sutta. Starts with knowing the breath, the in-breath, the out-breath, the length of the breath all over the body. then it has a little bit of variations here because it doesn't follow it exactly. Reducing the many bodily formations. Not exactly sure what he means by that because breathing is up and down. There isn't a lot of extra stuff, so that's where I need a little help with the Chinese. Anybody has some suggestions, I'm welcome to hear it. Sensing joyfulness, sensing happiness, sensing the mental formations, and then the mind's function of joy, collecting, liberating, and impermanence. And then focusing on emerging from distraction. It's a little bit different from the original teachings, then focusing on detachment, cessation, and abandonment. So these are fairly sequential as in the original teachings of the Buddha. So we can see how things evolve over time and how they begin to make sense for us. I'm a few minutes over my maximum allotted time. So I'm going to close here, and I was hoping that this was my last talk on this topic, but who knows? It'll be a while before I get to the rest of it. May all beings have happiness in the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be separated from the sacred joy which is free from suffering. And may all beings dwell in the great infinity which is free from attachment.